Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're exactly at noon Eastern time. We're going to wait like 30 more seconds as people come in. And then we'll get going. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're exactly at 12:01, so let's dive in. I know everybody's mind has been on the new government coalition that entered office in Israel, and the IATF has been planning and starting to host more open brown bag discussions for different constituent groups, both to try to provide an overview of some of the main changes happening at a very rapid pace, and also very much to hear from different constituents in American Jewish communities about your thoughts, concerns, questions, priorities. So this brown bag is in partnership with the Social Venture Fund, is intended for funders. It's I think that especially with the Foundation Forum, there's a long history of open and shared discussion. So this may not feel so different, but still, I think the fact is that the new government entered office with really prepared, with robust plans, with coalition agreements, and plans for policy changes and legislation that affect both the government structure and policies going forward. And so there's a lot of running after a moving target and trying to understand rapid change. Many of the changes are affecting Arab society directly, such as those changes to designated socioeconomic development budgets and plans or their implementation. And there are changes that may affect indirectly the efforts to strengthen the social fabric between Jewish majority and Arab minority in Israel. There are a handful, maybe more, of professionals really in Israel really diving into the coalition agreements, the changes to the budgets, and thinking deeply about what it might mean for the field. We have with us today Ofer Dagan from Sikkuy-Aufoq, who's been doing this. Our own Ilan Amit has been doing this. We prepared today's content also with Naslin Haddad Hajjahia, who at the last minute wasn't able to join us. And so thank you for Ofer for jumping in on a Thursday evening in Israel. And again, I want to underscore that this brown bag is in partnership with the Social Venture Fund. We often work closely with the Social Venture Fund. We're sister organizations, and I want to underscore how important such coordination, I believe, is at this time when everyone's trying to make sense of such rapid changes. I want to invite Batya quickly to say a few words from SVF, and then really dive into the content. Invite Ofer to start right after that.
Good afternoon to those of you in America, and good evening to those of us here in Israel. As Liron said, the coalition agreements, the plans, the policy changes that are clearly have been planned for and are now being put into effect are going to have an impact on our funding, on the philanthropy that we are making, and on the strategies that we are using in our funding. And the question has arisen within the Social Venture Fund, and I'm sure among many other donors as well, what are the ways in which we need to pivot or adjust our funding strategies in order to ensure that we are protecting the work that is being done and ensuring that it will be able to continue in one form or another, and to ask ourselves what more must we be doing at this time that we have not yet been doing. And so this will be the first stab at this question. And I want to welcome Ofer and Ilan and invite them to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. One more logistical comment. Please feel free to park your questions in the chat as we go, and your comments. I think Ofer and Ilan will speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have conversation. If for whatever reason you don't want to ask, if you want to ask anonymously, just private message me.
Ofer, you go ahead. I actually want to hand it to Ofer, and I'll share screen with the PowerPoint that we've prepared. Ofer, the stage is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ilan, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here. So as Liron mentioned, Ilan and myself, and also Nasrin, we've read all of the coalition agreement, and we want to share with you our initial analysis based on the coalition agreements and also upon the recent public and political discourse and statement that we've been seeing recently. So I will start with mentioning the three main processes that emerge from the political agreements, coalition agreements of the new government. And one of them is that I think should concern all of us is slowing down the trend of narrowing gaps, material gaps between Arabs and Jews in Israel. We've been witness and we've been part of the trend that we've seen in the last 10 years of government policies that were aimed at narrowing and closing the material gaps between Arabs and Jews in Israel that reached maybe their peak in government decision 550 that was approved about a year ago. And we see now, as an outcome of the coalition agreements, a trend of slowing down this trend. This is still only slowing down this trend, but there is also a potential, if we look further to the future, that also the trend will be reversed. And I say this because, generally speaking, 5-year plans are quite resilient. It's not something that can be overturned overnight and dismissed in one step. And indeed, we don't see an intent to dismiss entirely 550 decision, but we do see several very concerning steps, such as specific cuts to the budgets of the Negev Galilee ministry in 550 and in 1279. We do see another effort to shift budgets from civil issues to law enforcement issues. There is an intent to pass a government decision that will shift some of 550 budgets to issues of law enforcement. And also we see a plan to establish new Jewish towns and villages on the expense of Arab ones, and also preference for Jews in universities and in public sectors where Arab citizens have started to be more integrated. This is the first big process that we see. The second process that we are worried of is what we call cracking down on nationalist crime. And this is a trend where we see that, excuse me for 1 second, my dog is barking.
Liron, can I use this second for asking you to share from your computer? I have some sort of an issue here.
Sure.
I'm sorry. The second process that we are worried of is reframing the whole issue of civil crime and violence in Arab society as an issue of nationalist crime. And we see an intent of the new minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to launch a general attack on what he called nationalist crime of Arab citizens against Jews. It's an attempt to reframe the whole issue of crime and violence through the perspective of nationalist crime. And this includes also changing the open fire regulation of the police, and also withdrawing some of the regulation that was set after the Or Commission that was established after the October 2000 events. And this is something that is very worried because it has the potential to ignite clashes between the police and the Arab society, and also clashes between Arab society and Jewish citizens. And the third process that we see is a process that is not new, but still worrying, and this is the attempts to prohibit and inhibit the expressions of national identity of the Arab citizens through, among others, a legislation that will forbid raising the Palestinian flag and other processes. I see a question from Josh, what is ISA? ISA is Shabak, Israel Security Agency. Authority. So there is an intent to increase ISA operations inside Arab society, allegedly to prevent a crime, but we know that ISA is also one of the causes of crime. It's a complicated issue. If you want, we can explain furthermore later. I will pass it now to Ilan to explain in more details the implications of those general processes on specific plans that you all know and also engaged in.
Thank you, Ofer. So just to maybe clarify, Ofer, me, Nasreen Hajikhia, who couldn't be today with us, what we're doing is going through the previous agreements and the basic principles of the 5-year plans that were legislated in the past, going through the newly achieved coalitional agreements and the newly achieved very rapid processes of legislation. And we're crossing previous legislation and agreements with new legislation and agreements and trying to see what kind of changes and what kind of infrastructure for changes we're facing. And that's what we've been doing in the past couple of weeks. Also focused on 550 in crime and violence. I just want to say a few words about 550. I think there are two levels of challenges here. One level of challenges is the concern that the right-wing atmosphere of this government, the fact that we don't have an Arab political party within the coalition, the fact that we don't have any kind of a factor in the coalition that might reduce the effect of the extreme right-wing parties, will lead to reduction of budgets or making it harder to achieve budgets from previous governmental decisions, such as 550. But another level of complexity is the fact that there have been so many changes between the governmental authorities and agencies themselves. Units that are relevant and important for socioeconomic development plans in our society were relocated from one office to another, including the establishment of new governmental agencies to which some of those units were moved. This creates an internal challenge of implementation and budgeting for different governmental plans that is separate from the right-wing atmosphere that we're seeing among the government. Add to that the fact that the Ministry of Finance, that plays a crucial role in passing those budgets on, is under some sort of a rotation. The first minister who served as the Minister of Finance is Bezalel Smotrich. I'm not even clear who is going to be the second Minister of Finance after Bezalel Smotrich, because Deri, who was supposed to be that minister, was just resigned from the Knesset. That brings another level of complexity and an external challenge to the implementation of those plans. I also want to say, referring to Government Resolution 550, that some of those specific sections that relate to possible budget cuts for Arab local authorities might have an effect actually on the stronger, higher ranked socioeconomically Arab local authorities, because the previous coalitional agreements under 550 included allocations of funds for Arab local authorities for the generation of income generating projects. For example, paving the roofs of your public structures in solar panels in order to generate income through selling electricity to the electricity company. More than a handful of Arab local authorities have already moved forward in processes of planning and implementation of such projects. The new established and the new budget cuts that we're expecting will actually hit the stronger Arab local authorities who are already in the process of implementing such programs, already published tenders, already signed contracts with providers, and so on. A few words about the effect of education on education, identity, and culture. And I want to refer to that in two ways. One is at the risk of the relocation of the unit for external programs from the Ministry of Education to the Prime Minister's office under Avi Maoz. We did a bit of mapping and looked at a total of programs operating under that unit and separated the programs that are relevant for Arab society and shared society content. And we've reached about 2,400 programs that are relevant for our world of programming, Arab society and shared society programs. Those are at risk because we're hearing the voices coming from that government. And I think that plans that refer to Palestinian identity, Arab culture, shared society are at risk simply because the person who's sitting at the head of that unit is highly likely not interested in following up on their budgeting and implementation. But the other kind of programs at risk are programs that are marked for Arab culture and identity under 550. Those can be other education budgets or culture budgets, budgets allocated for culture. And again, the voices coming from the government leave little room for doubt on the implementation budgeting of those programs. We're also hearing some voices, very concerning voices, from professional staff, Arab professional staff in different state authorities and ministries that are already starting to feel uncomfortable under the new ministers or under the new directors of those ministries. This is a whole challenge on its own. One of the biggest issues was always and will remain finding the professionals within the state authorities to push such programs forward. Quickly over government resolution 1834 for mixed cities, which we discussed in our annual meeting. And we saw the presentation by Jonathan Paz during our annual meeting. The plan that passed in 2022, late in 22, was sort of the foot in the door that the Ministry for Social Equality managed to achieve by legislating just the first phase of a government resolution for mixed cities, setting the table for a more holistic government resolution with bigger budget and more significant impact, with some achievements within even that small scale government resolution in the form of using the terminology of mixed cities, in the form of declaring legally the mixed cities as areas of national priority. I can say that we have no indication right now for a follow-up government resolution, 1835, with bigger budgets and more holistic scope. Again, this is not specifically written in anywhere, but this is also not written anywhere that the government will follow up on that government resolution. And especially with the reduction of authorities and budgets from the Ministry for Social Equality, which is the ministry that is responsible on legislating, on passing the new government resolution for mixed cities. Last few words about government resolution 549 against crime and violence in our society. Ofer mentioned that in the beginning, but I also want to maybe give a couple of examples about the shift that we're seeing towards enforcement, hard enforcement, and the expansion of the powers of policing rather than focus on civil ways to reduce crime and violence. Government Resolution 549 had multiple sections relating to civil processes that will lead to the reduction of crime and violence in our society. Those, for example, included the prevention of recidivism or different community programs against domestic violence, the establishment of shelters for women at risk of violence, at risk of domestic violence, and so on. It also included references to the importance of gap year programs in getting youth out of the streets as means of reducing crime and violence, very different sections that are totally, completely civil. I'm under the impression in different ways, because of the way that the framing of the newly established Ministry for National Security is being set up, because of the voices coming from the government, and because of the different ways to expand the powers of policing over Arab citizens of the state, that those civil factors of Government Resolution 549 will not be followed upon, and that those budgets will be deviated towards hard enforcement. And I also want to say that I'm personally concerned, and I think as people, funders, organizations who work with our society, I'm personally concerned from the blurring of lines, blurring of jurisdictions between Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel and Palestinians who are not citizens of the State of Israel, who live in the West Bank. The fact that the State of Israel is introducing means of enforcement and policing that are used upon Palestinian populations in the West Bank puts Arab citizens of the state in a very blurry place when it comes to law enforcement, and makes it easier for this new government to draw or to create the impression that each and every crime that is being done by an Arab is a nationalistic crime rather than simply a crime. And that brings a complexity. Last word about the Negev, and Ofer and I had a whole discussion about this morning, and then I'm handing this back to Ofer. I mentioned before that we have two different challenges with the implementation of 550. One is the lack of willingness from the government to implement that plan as we see it coming from the coalitional agreements, and the relocation of relevant units between different ministries. When it comes to the Negev Bedouins and Government Resolution 1279 and the responsible ministries for implementation, the Authority for Economic Development for the Negev Bedouin, which some of you met on one of our Zoom calls. We met with Sigal Moran, with Leah Briskin. This unit is moved to the Ministry for Social Equality, which is not necessarily bad. It might also set the table for some coherence between Government Resolution 1279 and Government Resolution 550. But also the Bedouin Authority is relocated into the same ministry, the Ministry for Social Equality, and that will be, I'll say carefully, interesting to see how those two authorities live together next to one another. But I also want to mention the fact that within Government Resolution 1279, there was a very clear call for the recognition of 3 unrecognized Bedouin villages, Abde, Hashem Zane, and Rahme, in the Negev. We're not seeing any specific mentioning of a follow-up on that recognition of those 2 villages, but we are seeing a specific mentioning for the establishment of new Jewish settlements in the Negev. We still don't know the exact location, but my understanding is that this is around the Arad Valley, in proximity to some of the existing unrecognized Bedouin villages. So Ofer and I had a long conversation about this morning. We might actually follow up in the discussion about this later. And I want to hand this in a minute. I want to hand this back to Ofer and mention that the coalitional agreements have a very specific mentioning of the establishment of 14 new Jewish settlements specifically in the Negev and in the Galilee under the Negev Galilee office. Those, and I wanted to mention that in this PowerPoint, not only because it demonstrates the mood, the atmosphere, the way that this government is looking at the state of Israel, the actions that we're expecting this government to take place. And this is an exact quote from within the coalition agreements. The establishment of those new Jewish settlements is specifically mentioned in regard of areas highly dense with Arab citizens, with Arab villages and towns, as means of strengthening Jewish presence. But I also wanted to mention this in this PowerPoint because I wanted to show and demonstrate a way in which the state does have the capacity to establish new villages and towns. The state does have the budgets when it's willing to do so, to plan, implement, budget, and lead such complex and highly costly processes, but not necessarily for Arab citizens of the state. And Ofer, back to you.
Thank you, Ilan. We want to conclude with 5 points that we think are important in order to gain a larger perspective, because it can be blinding and desperating to look only on the intentions of the government. And it's also important to notice a few other things. One is that the implementation percentage of coalition agreements is about 60%. And this number, 62%, is taken from the last stable right-wing coalition that existed between 2015 and 2019. That means that 62% of the coalition, of the clauses inside the coalition agreements were fulfilled, were implemented, and the other 40% weren't. This is one. The second is that sometimes there are unintended results of actions. For instance, in 2013, the government raised the threshold barrier in the election, in general election, in order to oppress the Arab representative from reaching the Knesset, and the outcome was the opposite, because the Arab parties combined and created the joint list. The Arab representation in the Knesset increased. So the thing is that there is a great impact in also what other agents and actors do beside the government, and there is a lot of strength and power in other fields, and among them our fields of philanthropy and civil society. And what we will plan and what we will do will impact what how the policy will look like eventually, and how the outcomes will look like eventually. 3 is, speaking of 550 and 1279, 5-year plans are generally strong and resilient. We don't see, as I mentioned in the beginning, a threat to dismiss the whole plan. The great risk is, and Ilan also mentioned it, a general decrease in the motivation of officials, bureaucrats in the government ministries to implement those plans. And these are very complicated plans that demand a great synchronization between many government ministries and many officials. And if it will be lower on their priority list, and the motivation will be lower, so it will affect the implementation rate and quality. And the fourth point that derived from this point is that as government motivation to implement 5-year plan decreases, the importance of civil society as a watchdog that monitors those plans and push the government to implement it and pull public pressure in order to do it increases. The fifth point is that we are now very focused on seeing what the government will do and try to mitigate the risk and try to protect the current achievement that we did. And this is very important and significant, but it is also very important and significant to look further to the future and also keep the plan, keep proactively planning for the future and think big and come up with positive initiatives of how to promote better society between Jews and Arabs in Israel. Because what we see now is that the right wing, they didn't wait until they reach power to write those plans. They wrote it a long time before, and they came prepared. And I think the same thing can be said about us as well, because we didn't wait that the previous government will come to power. We worked on 550 long before the government. We knew what government will be and what will be the political conditions that will enable or won't enable it. So this is also, I think, an important lesson that we have to think proactively and to plan ahead and think big.